A couple of years ago, Dr. LaHaye asked Ed Heinsohn and I, why was there a decline, especially in the academic world, in interest, in dispensational Bible prophecy? And, you can't give him a simple answer. So we had to come up with this complicated answer. It's called Postmodernism. But basically, we believe that there is a paradigm shift, and it's not for the good, the way people are thinking about everything. And, of course, this has been reflected in the changes that are going on in seminaries as well as the changes that are going on in churches. And I believe that there's been a major shift in the last 15 to 20, maybe 30 years from basically a culture that thinks about the Bible in a more rational way to more of a mysticism. And that mysticism is postmodernism. If modernism was old liberalism, which it was, where they attacked the Bible through rational intellectual arguments, that gave rise to postmodernism, which is a form of mysticism and irrationalism. Not that it doesn't have an intellectual dimension, it certainly does, but it is more of a mystical approach to the way things go, like the Da Vinci Code, for example, would be a good example. And so people who believe the Bible is the Word of God, in a sense, are pre-modern. And that's where I would classify myself, even though some postmodernists would probably say I was a modernist, a rationalist. But pre-modern is before the Enlightenment occurred and the rational attack on biblical Christianity. But that has led to a decline in people interpreting the Bible literally. They want to look for the shadow, the mystical meaning, you see what I'm saying, behind the text, and they're more open to that than a literal interpretation, which is viewed as being simplistic, overly simplistic, and sophomoric. And so we have all of these a gathering today of overly simplistic people and present our approach in the study of the Bible. And our first speaker is David Noebel, who is head of Summit Ministries, which you've been doing that for 30, 35 years? 45 years. And this guy is kind of the father of the Worldview movement. People that study Worldview, you meet some guys, what do you do? I'm in Worldview. And that kind of stuff. Right? I've had people tell me that. What do you do? I'm a Worldview guy. But David Noebel was one of the first ones. I remember listening to some of his tapes back in the early 70s, even. And as I was driving in my Volkswagen Super Beetle, that was destined to get buried in the blizzard in Buffalo, New York, and never recover in the blizzard of '77. But be that as it may. Dr. Noebel is an expert on all this kind of stuff, and he's going to give us a lecture this morning on what is postmodernism. And throughout the rest of the conference, we're going to be focusing on dispensationalism and the postmodern influence on eschatology or Bible prophecy. And we're going to have someone talk about the openness of God view. We're going to have people talk about the emerging church movement, which is a product of postmodernism, and how they hate Bible prophecy, basically, those kinds of things. And hopefully this is going to give us some kind of orientation to think about how to better present, the message that the Bible has, in these areas. Before we begin, I want us to open in a word of prayer. Father, we just come to you this morning knowing that you control the times and the season, the rising up and the falling down of people, individuals, and nations. And we know that you are in control of major events that come on the scene, like the Reformation and even the decline doctrinally of the church. in some ways. And we ask that you would be with us this morning, that we might gain some understanding so that we might better be able to minister your word, what the Bible teaches about Bible prophecy to people who need to know within the church what the future teaches. And we pray that you would help us to understand and help the speakers this morning to be able to articulate and communicate these things. And we also want to lift up Dr. Heinsohn's daughter, especially his granddaughter that's in the hospital, that you would be with her and heal her and bring her out of her coma, and the rest of the family, that you would heal them as well. And we just ask for your grace and blessings on this event in the next 2.5 days. In Christ's name, we commit this. Amen. Dr. Noebel has a PhD from the University of Tulsa, I assume in philosophy, and so we're happy for you to come at this time and present our first presentation. Dr. David Noebel.
Do I put it on my ear or in my nose?
Depends on if you're
Tommy, where did you get a PhD from Tulsa? They don't give PhDs at the University of Tulsa.
What'd you get?
Underwater basket weaving.
Oh.
I went to the University of Wisconsin.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm a Badger.
Why did I have you at Tulsa?
Because I got a master's degree at Tulsa.
Oh,
But I didn't finish my PhD either, so I mean the whole thing is screwed up here. I started the summit. I nearly lost my faith at the University of Wisconsin. My classmate was Dallas Willard. He helped me. Well, we have some work to do today, and they're not giving me a whole lot of time to do it. In fact, I could answer the question in a hurry and sit down. What is postmodernism? Postmodernism is a worldview, one of the 6 that I have passed out on this sheet of paper here, vying for the hearts and minds of the world. That's what postmodernism is. I will repeat. Postmodernism is a worldview, one of the 6, vying for the hearts and minds of the whole world. Now it's going to take me the rest of this day and a whole lot of other days to prove this point. Some people don't even believe that Christianity is a worldview. So if we wanted to start there, that would take us another couple of hours. But that's by far the quickest definition of what postmodernism is. And I brought their Bible. By the way, all these worldviews have a Bible. This is Christianity's Bible, in case some of you are wondering. Christianity have a worldview? Yes, here's this Bible. Here's the Bible of postmodernism. Isn't that nice? It's called Mikhail Foucault, The Order of Things and Archaeology of the Human Sciences, which is somewhat interesting because they're not supposed to be into science. They're supposed to be anti-science. And then their New Testament is Richard Rorty's book, Achieving Our Country. And then all the other worldviews that you have there are all part and parcel of the 6 worldviews that are out there on the front burner today. I want to begin with a verse from 1 Corinthians because this one, again, summarizes what I'm into. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 20. Holman, I got to tell you which one this is because some of you are going to ask me. This is Holman Christian Standard Bible, Nashville, Tennessee, 2004. Page 1077. Where is the philosopher? Where is the scholar? Where is the debater of this age? hasn't God made the world's wisdom foolish? I contend that God's wisdom has made the wisdom of the world foolish. And I can't think of a better way to prove that than a discussion of postmodernism. You talk about foolishness and why Christians would even look in this direction. I just can't believe. I just can't believe. They'd be much better off looking in the direction of the secular humanists, which is another major worldview, than they would be at the postmodern worldview. But let's see what we can do here. I have put this together here. We're not going to be able to get through all 10 categories because by my definition of a worldview has to speak to at least 10 categories to even come close to being considered a worldview. And I have those 10 categories on this sheet for you as well. Starts with theology, ends with history. I'm going to contend that postmodernism speaks to all 10 areas. This is to a group of people who don't even want you to believe they're a worldview. Because one of their dictas is there is no meta-narrative. There's no meta-narrative. No. Everything's up for grabs. It is? Is atheism up for grabs? I don't think so. Is evolution up for grabs? I don't think so. Have they deconstructed evolution? By the way, have they deconstructed Darwin? They haven't even deconstructed Darwin. In fact, there are two white male Europeans they haven't deconstructed yet. Darwin and Marx. Everyone else is up for grabs. And themselves. They have not deconstructed themselves. Foucault has not been deconstructed by other postmodernists. So this is going to be an interesting study for those of you, and if you don't understand a word I've said so far, don't worry about it. Everything I say, if Derrida were here today, he would agree, and then he would say, or what? Anyone know his famous statement? Or vice versa. Whatever the statement is in a proposition, he will always say at the very end of it, or vice versa, which means whatever you say doesn't really make a whole lot of sense anyway. So, I'm going to begin with postmodern theology. We're going to go on to philosophy, ethics, bio, and we'll see how far we can get, Tommy. You tell me when we should stop, but I have an idea too. We might stop after the end of each section and then just see what the questions are in that section. Is that all right with you, or should we wait to the end? Wait to the end? Because I know we're being taped too, so. Okay. Does postmodernism have a theology? I will contend the answer is yes. I will present it to you. I have their Bible here to prove it. Is that fair enough for everyone? Which is somewhat structured, somewhat logical. And since they're anti-logos, that's really something in itself. Richard Rorty, and you have the quote up here, I might have written an account of how even atheists like myself are impressed, improved, and morally instructed by reading Pilgrim's Progress. Well, Richard Rorty is one of their trinity. In fact, their trinity is Foucault, Derrida, and Rorty, with a few other subsets. Atheism is the theological belief that there is no God, no supernatural creator, no divine moral lawgiver, no ultimate judge of man's actions. It is a theological backbone of not only secular humanism and Marxism, but it is also the predominant theological view of classical postmodernism. And I'm going to emphasize classical here because there are some subsets. And as we go through here, you're going to see the group I'm talking about. I'm talking about the hardcore classical postmodern crowd. According to although more subtle in some ways than their fellow atheists, postmodernists have their theological underpinnings in atheism. Kevin Van Hooser says that postmodernists agree with Nietzsche that God, which is to say the supreme being of classical theism, has become unbelievable, as have the autonomous self and the meaning of history. Now, if we really were going to do this in a little better fashion, I guess, than what I'm going to do, the fact that they're arguing for atheism the autonomous self and the meaning of history, we could probably go into psychology and history, but that wouldn't give us a real good run into that. But I think we can do it this way. According to Glenn Ward, the vast majority of mainstream postmodernists emerged from the Marxist atheist tradition, and that's important to keep in mind. Mikhail Foucault, for example, was at one time a member of the French Communist Party and one other Maoist organization. And by the way, the other Maoist organization that he was a member of was a terrorist group. Jean Baudelaire's writings were within a loosely Marxist framework, thinking it was his responsibility to bring Marx up to date. Pierre McElrea was a Marxist critic concerned with how texts act to reproduce the values of capitalism. A sympathetic critic defined postmodernism as Marxism light, dressed in a French tuxedo, sipping French wine, in a French cafe on the campus of the International College of Philosophy. A less sympathetic critic referred to postmodernism as linguistic sophistry, seeking to save Marxism's irrelevant posterior. I cleaned that one up, by the way. What he said was not printable for this group. So, Tommy, you should like that. I reconstructed it after I deconstructed it. During its early years, Marxism produced a this-world salvation for the enlightened irreligious. However, with the passage of time and countless body bags, the idea of a Marxist utopia was eventually revealed for what it was, a mirage. As a result, postmodernism was birthed as a wayward stepchild of Marxism, and in a sense, a generation's realization that it is orphaned. Thus, postmodernism became a reaction against Marx's dogma of violent revolutions, Marxist dialectical logic, and the Marxist worldview itself. On the other hand, postmodernism is a continuation of other Marxist ideas, namely atheism, socialism, punctuated evolution, and the socially constructed self, among others. In the pre-modern era, which is where Tommy says he lives, God, revelation, and the clergy were the ultimate sources for truth about reality. However, in the modern era, science and reason became the key resources for truth about reality. Well into the age of modernism, Friedrich Nietzsche stated the obvious from a modernist perspective: God is dead, we have killed him. By this statement, Nietzsche did not mean to imply that humanity killed God or that God was once alive and had died. Rather, Nietzsche meant that belief in God was no longer necessary. Foucault later checked the vital signs of modernity and discovered a corpse as cold as Nietzsche's God. He discovered that the modernist era had given way to another, postmodernism. With this coming new era, both Nietzsche and Foucault predicted a period of violence, death, destruction, and ultimately the end of humanity itself. By the way, because of that point, postmodernism is not a humanistic worldview. It's an anti-humanistic worldview. Most of them would agree with Stephen Gould. The only thing that's going to survive is not the human race, but bacteria. Bacteria. And they haven't really evolved a whole lot in the last 3.5 billion years either. So I'm not sure how they're going to play that. Now we're going to do a little postmodernism here. I'm going to quote from Nietzsche, but notice that part of the postmodern appeal is to sort of put the propositional phrases in the background and bring to the front or to the front burner stories. They're big into stories. They love stories. By the way, the Bible loves stories too. This is always sort of interesting, isn't it? The Bible is full of stories. And yet they want us to believe that we're going to go into a new era. We're going to leave the proposition of the modernists and we're going to go into storytelling. Woo. Well, how that plays out in law is turning out to be very interesting too. But anyway, here we go. This is Nietzsche. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours? He ran to the marketplace. He cried incessantly, I seek God. I seek God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage? Emigrated? They yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. By the way, if you've seen pictures of Nietzsche, look at his eyes. They will pierce you even in death. Whither is God, he cried. I tell you, we have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Anyway, away from all suns. Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there any up or down? Are we not straying as though an infinite nothing, or as through an infinite nothing? Do we not breathe the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Can you just feel this, by the way? You talk about the power of literature. Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? God's too decompose. God is dead. God remains dead. We've killed him. And how shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? Isn't this interesting the way he's put all this? By the way, this is a classic in atheism right here. Classic. What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves become God simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed. Whoever is born after us, for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history before. Heilsgeschlichte, some of you remember that word. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent, and they stared at him in astonishment. Listen to this. At last he threw his lantern on the ground. He broke it into pieces. He went out. I have come too early. I have come too early. My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way. Still wandering, it has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than most distant stars, and yet they have done it to themselves. It has been related further that on the same day the madman forced his way into several churches. There he struck up with his little motto, God is dead. Let out and called to account, he is and said always to have replied nothing. But what after all are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God? Whoa. Go to Germany today. Go to the most beautiful churches in the world. They're all empty, except for two people usually, the caretaker and his wife. They light a candle on Saturday night. Sepulchres of God. Foucault elaborates, Nietzsche indicated the turning point from a long way off. It is not so much the absence or the death of God that is affirmed as the end of man. It becomes apparent then that the death of God and the last man are engaged in a contest with more than one round. Is it not the last man who announces that he has killed God? This situating this language, his thought, his laughter in the space of that already dead God? Yet positing himself also as he who has killed God and whose existence includes the freedom and the decision of that murder. Thus, the last man is at the same time older and yet younger than the death of God, since he has killed God. It is he himself who must answer for his own finitude, but since it is in the death of God that he speaks, thinks, and exists, his murdered self is doomed to die. New gods, the same gods, are already swelling the future ocean. Man will disappear. Man will disappear proves that basically postmodernism, classical postmodernism, is anti-humanistic. The humanistic point of view says that man is at the top of the pecking order. The postmodernists don't buy that. Both Nietzsche and Foucault agree that after humanity kills God, they sign their own death certificate. A worldview perspective reveals how theological beliefs have implications for other areas of life. Nietzsche and Foucault understand the connections, which makes it a worldview, by the way. That's my argument. It's not just their atheism. They don't stop with their atheism. They go on from there. The classical postmodern theological spectrum stretches from militant atheism to village atheist. All the major postmodern writers were atheists. I don't know of an exception. If that's wrong, you have to let me know. I don't know of one exception to this point, including Foucault and Derrida, Lyotard, Vattel, Barthes, Baudelaire, McIlroy, Deloitte, Guattari, and Lucan. Charlotte Allen noted that Jacques Derrida, Mikhail Foucault, and their followers were all militant atheists, with all the intolerance and totalitarian tendencies of that breed. Later on in the paper, I have a quote from Foucault that'll tick some of your hair right up to the top, if you have any. Yet at times, Derrida himself was more cryptic about his atheism. Speaking before a convention of the American Academy of Religion in 2002, Derrida commented, "I rightly pass for an atheist." However, when asked why he would not say more plainly, "I am an atheist," he replied, "Well, maybe I'm not an atheist." You see what I'm saying? Or vice versa. That's all you have to remember. When you read Derrida, if you read Derrida, and he's worse than Hegel, but if you read Derrida, just remember, every time you read something, you just say, or vice versa, and you're home free. Maybe I'm not an atheist. Well, how can Derrida claim to be and not be an atheist? Both the existence or non-existence of God requires a universal statement about reality. But Derrida is unwilling to make such an absolute claim. In this regard, Derrida's theology is consistent with his postmodern inclination for ambiguity. Likewise, Richard Rorty at one time admitted he was an atheist. In fact, we started the paper with his quote. But in a subsequent work, The Future of Religion, he says he now agrees with Gianni Vattimo that atheism, objective evidence for the non-existence of God, is just as untenable as theism, objective evidence for the existence of God. Thus, Rorty insists that atheism, too, must be abandoned in favor of something he labels anti-clericalism. By the way, if you really believe he believes that, I got news for you. He is still an atheist to his bootstraps, or lower. Ecclesiastical institutions are dangerous, this is Rorty, but not necessarily the local congregation of believers. Religion, he says, is unobjectionable as long as it is privatized. Well, isn't that where we are? We just keep it in the church, four walls of the church, right? So we're just listening to Richard. If God is dead, the belief that there is no ultimate reality or eternal truth becomes a philosophical necessity, which we will see in the next part here. A firm believer in this, Derrida concluded further that words and sentences have no inherent meaning. He insisted that human beings construct reality through their use of language. In other words, as you read this page, you will construct your own meaning, shaped by your culture and life experiences. The author's meaning is thus deconstructed. Let me just stop there. Deconstruction is the hermeneutics of postmodernism. Deconstruction is the hermeneutics of postmodernism. Does Christianity have a hermeneutics? Of course. Has something to do with grammar and history and so forth. Firm believer in this, Derrida concluded further that words and sentences have no inherent meaning. He insisted that human beings construct reality through their use of language. In other words, as you read this page, you will construct your own meaning shaped by your culture and life experiences. The author's meaning is thus deconstructed or altered by the reader. So now the author of the text is subset. The meaning of the text is determined by the reader. The reader. As Ward says, deconstruction is a literary method of reading which effectively turns texts against themselves. Well, that could be or not be, depending on the reader. If the reader thinks he's close to what the writer is saying, he'll agree with it. If he doesn't, he'll make it up. There are classic illustrations on this, by the way. In the biblical area, Jesus with the woman at the well. Jesus with the woman at the well. Jesus had an affair with her. Okay? That's right there. You just have to read it into it. John loved Jesus. Oh, this is a deadly one. That proves that Jesus was a homosexual, along with John, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's no end to this. Of course, since Foucault was a homosexual, he'd like that. For example, according to Derrida's theory of deconstruction, the Bible is merely a book written by men who were locked in their own culture, experiences, and language. Thus, the biblical authors were writing about their own subjective experiences, not communicating objective or eternal truths about God and humanity. Therefore, when someone reads the Bible today, he or she brings a personal interpretative grid to the text. The theory of deconstruction can thus be used to explain how some cultures can read the Bible and proceed to slaughter another race. Other cultures reading the same Bible build hospitals, schools, orphanages, and homeless shelters. Derrida's theory of deconstruction influenced a group of theologians in the 1960s. John A.T. Robinson, in his book, Honest to God, sought to explain what it meant to be a Christian in the postmodern world. This group became known as the Death of God theologians. According to Graham Ward, these theologians saw the potential of Derrida's deconstruction for furthering their project of announcing the end of theology and the death of God. The Death of God theologians fastened onto Derrida's idea that words refer only to other words in a textual setting and cannot be used to describe external realities such as God. They therefore claim that God is not the supreme being who is literally up there in heaven somewhere, but instead we should think of God as being out there in a spiritual sense. God is there when we love another person, and thus becomes the main Christian message. In this sense, the traditional concept of God ruling over His creation is lifeless. Alistair McGrath, in The Twilight of Atheism, speaks of the relationship between postmodernism, atheism, and deconstruction. By the way, it's a wonderful book, in case you haven't read it. Alistair McGrath's The Twilight of Atheism. He says, many postmodern writers are, after all, atheists, at least in the sense of not actively believing in God. The very idea of deconstruction seems to suggest that the idea of God ought to be eliminated from Western culture as a power play on the part of the churches and others with invested interest in its survival. Derrida also supposed that the Western powers, because of their belief in the existence of God, went off the edge toward violence. This is an interesting concept. Where is the history here? I have no idea. However, this notion is far off base. The three isms of the 20th century responsible for the slaughter of tens of millions, and by the way, the figure is over 171 million right now, and could go up as high as 320 million. That's the whole 20th century, by the way. Whole 20th century, the greatest century of slaughter in all of human history. The three isms of the 20th century responsible for this slaughter, communism, Nazism, and fascism, were not exactly bastions of theism and Christianity. In another lecture I give, I try to point out that none of the ideas of Christianity were involved in this slaughter. I think that would be a good thesis for some of your students. None of the ideas of the 20th century responsible for the slaughter of the 20th century were Christian ideas. As a matter of fact, all three, fascism, communism, and Nazism, were grounded in atheism, evolution, and socialism, the very stuff of postmodernism. The postmodern idea that religious beliefs are privately preferences has filtered down from the academy to the unenlightened commoner, many of whom now embrace pluralism. Religious pluralism is the belief that one must be tolerant of all religious beliefs because no one religion can be true. This notion agrees with the defining tenets of the postmodern mood: skepticism of absolute truth, skepticism of a discernible foundation for knowledge, and in the end, skepticism of all meta-narratives. As such, many of those immersed in the present postmodern culture deny religious truth claims. This trend can be seen in how our present society often thinks about religious claims. In general, in the pre-modern and modern eras, religious claims were judged to be either true or false. For example, either there is a God or there is not a God. Either Jesus is a Savior or He's not a Savior. Either miracles happen or they don't happen. However, in our postmodern climate, where truth is denied, and by the way, that should be universal truth, because they got truth with a small t. Where universal truth is denied, religious claims are based on preferences rather than objective standards. For example, either you prefer the notion of the existence of God or you do not. Either you like the idea of Jesus being Savior or you do not. Either miracles appeal to you or they do not. This attitude accommodates all religious preferences. A problem arises when certain religions claim to go beyond personal preferences and convey objective truth, such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But making exclusive truth claims runs counter to the postmodern condition. For that reason, the only religions not tolerated are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Another theological trend is that of postmodern Christianity, or post-conservatism, or the emergent church. A small yet influential group of Christian thinkers make up the leadership of this group. Stanley Grenz, Murphy, Olson, Weber, Smith, Westphal, and Brian McLaren. These postmodern thinkers should not be identified with such atheistic thinkers as Nietzsche, Derrida, Foucault, Lyotard, or Rorty. McLaren makes it clear that although he and his followers accept the term postmodern, they are not nihilistic, relativistic, anti-Christian, and otherwise slimy and bad. He does have a sense of humor, by the way, if you read him. He's fun to read. Most in this camp believe that the term best applies to their disposition rather than their dogma. Now, I'm not going to get this far, but this is a footnote free of charge right here. It's interesting that the emergent church, now the Christian part of the emergent church, would say, they would probably deny Noah, the ark, and the flood, right? Foucault accepts it. Now you figure that one out. That's a footnote. Some of you got that one. Although the movement is young, a number of common characteristics are emerging. Well, you would expect them to emerge from the emergent church. A critique of the negative aspects of modernism. By the way, and Christians haven't had a critique of modernism? We've been critiquing modernism since Darwin, and they've called us everything but a human being. A strong emphasis on community. Well, that's what we have right here, is a community, and we've been meeting here for 15 years. By the way, when they say community, that should raise 2 or 3 antennas straight up, because their so-called community turns out to be a little form of communalism, which turns out to be something else too. An emphasis on putting one's faith into action. Ooh, I mean, Christians haven't been doing that, huh? All the Christians I run around with, they've been told you're too active. Get back in your church. I even ran for Congress once. Does that tell you how stupid I was? I lost. A reminder that not all truth is propositional. The story of the Good Samaritan expresses the same truth that is found within the proposition, love your neighbor. Well, now, come on. How long has Christianity been pushing the Good Samaritan? That's one of the greatest stories in the Bible. On the other hand, several troubling traits are also emerging. A denial of the Bible's inerrancy. Now, we're going to get to some of this with some of your other speakers here. A skepticism of foundational knowledge. An orthodoxy that is perhaps too generous. I had to write that real carefully. I hope I get out of here alive on that one. Thus, although they claim to be evangelical, the jury of orthodoxy is still in deliberation. Myron Penner contends that culturally and philosophically, the West is in the throes of postmodernity. His suggestion that Christians must come to terms with and work with the postmodernists and its implications for faith, not ignore or retreat from it. Above all, Christians must persevere in our faith through hope and love. What's wrong with logic and thinking straight? Come on. Are we going to give up reason? You all are going to give up reason, huh? Going to give up science? Most of you wouldn't be here apart from science. We'd still be in a hovel someplace, sitting on something. I don't know. Why Christians are going to look in this direction just blows me away. Penner warns Christians flirting with postmodernism to be careful not to get caught up in the subjectivity of language to the point where words become emptied of all truth. Well, my friends, that's happened in some areas already. We recognize that some individuals become atheists because they think Darwin solved the question of life's ultimate origins. Others become atheists because they look upon God's moral order as too restrictive. Still others believe, because they agree with Freud, that God was a projection. When children have problems, they run to their father for protection. When adults have problems, they project their earthly father into the skies, and they run to his entity for comfort. Some look at all the evil in the world, decide that no loving God could allow such a situation. In the end, however, this is interesting too, postmodernists offer no new rationale for defending their brand of atheism. In fact, if you really get into this deeply, they hardly give you anything positive. It's all deconstruction. It's destructive. I can hardly find a good positive idea in the whole crowd. Maybe sipping French wine. That's a joke. They don't do that at Dallas, right? That we know of. Yeah. How did I get on that? But it's true. They offer no new rationale for atheism. So if you've studied Marxism and all the reasons for Marx and Lenin and all these guys on their atheism, if you study the secular humanists and all their arguments for atheism, you'll find nothing new. There's nothing new. In response to religious pluralism, we contend that the problem with this system in particular is the problem with postmodernism in general. Namely, that neither one perspective nor our preferences can dictate reality. Real people may end up in a literal hell regardless of whether or not they prefer the doctrine of eternal punishment. In the end, reality is what it is, whether one prefers that reality or not. And in case you're wondering, here's a bit of advice. Don't jump off the Empire State Building. You're going to go down. And this is heavy truth. This is heavy stuff. You might prefer to go up. Forget it. I know, it's called gravity. And that's science. And we're anti-science. And you're dead, too. For example, many may prefer a number of Christianity's tenets: creationism, fall, salvation, judgment, abstinence, sobriety. However, our preferences about Christianity or even reality itself cannot change the true nature of reality. I think we can live with that. I think we better live with it. I think we must live with that. The Bible, of course, has a descriptive term for a person who says in his or her heart there is no God. Psalm 14:1, in case you're looking for it. And also look at Psalm 10:4. It's another good verse on that point. We will explore in later chapters the consequences of atheism as lived out in the arenas of ethics, psychology, sociology, and each of the other disciplines. In these chapters, we will find that those who embrace this theology have followed a foolish path indeed. In the final analysis, atheism is a belief system of the intellectual elite. Even Midgley, Mary Midgley, I think a British philosopher. Have you read anything about Mary Midgley? Interesting. She admits that the commoner just really can't believe that the whole universe happened by chance. The commoner I call that Joe Sixpack. In the final analysis, atheism is a belief system of the intellectual elite, the people of fashion, because only they possess enough faith to believe in it. You see, it takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a Christian, if you get right down to it. And those of you that have read Norm Geisler's book and Frank Turek's book on I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist will know what I'm talking about. To be an atheist, my friends, let me tell you, you better have tons of faith, because you're going to use every ounce. The common, I had it here. I forgot where I had that. The common everyday working man cannot believe that everything in the universe is a result of random chance. Mary Midgley says it may simply not be within our capacity, except, of course, by just avoiding thought, to think of the universe as having no sort of purpose or direction whatever. It's a good quote from her, and I sourced that in your paper someplace. Are the footnotes in the back of the... Is that how we did that? Huh. I sent the footnotes to you. I just don't happen to have them here. Okay, that's postmodern theology. We're next going to do postmodern philosophy. And then we're going to do postmodern ethics and postmodern biology and postmodern psychology and postmodern sociology. How about postmodern law? How about postmodern politics? Be surprised where some of that ends up. And postmodern history. And then we'll have a pretty good idea what postmodernism is. It's a worldview. It's a worldview. Vying for the hearts and minds of the world, just like Christianity, Islam, secular humanism, Marxism. Of course, Marxism is dead, as you know. You all believe that too, right? Have you heard of Latin America, South America, and Central America? And you tell me that Marxism is dead and the Berlin Wall is down, huh? And I will tell you, you are living in a different universe. Of course, if you're a good postmodern, that would be easy, because there are as many universes as there are human beings. Is that nice? Yes. Okay, postmodern philosophy. For those of you that are into this area of philosophy, this will interest you. Interest me a whole lot. Richard Rorty, we should give up the correspondence theory of truth. Uh-oh. Huh. Or vice versa. You're catching on already, brother. And when you got here, you couldn't spell postmodern. Now you are one. Good, good. We should give up the correspondence theory of truth and start treating moral and scientific beliefs as tools for achieving greater human happiness, rather than as representations of the intrinsic nature of reality. If you really believe that, by the way, you're dead. You won't even get here. You won't even get here. The philosophical ideas of postmodernism divide modern-day academia. Today's college students will find postmodernism ruling the day in their humanities and social studies courses. But they will also find modernism still prevalent in the sciences, engineering, and mathematics courses. And one other point here that I think is really interesting. I don't know of any philosophical department in this country with all, what do we got, 3,000 colleges and universities, or maybe more. I don't know of any philosophical or a philosophy department that is postmodern. Did you hear that? Philosophy departments are not postmodern. Now, half the English department at the University of Texas at Austin is postmodern, but only half. Well, a little bit more, 38 out of 50-some. So even here we want to be somewhat careful. Modernism still prevails in science, engineering, and math. And in fact, one of my great arguments against postmodernism involves math. Writing a check. You want to get rid of the postmodernists out of your school systems, this is really simple to do, really. You tell the bursar to pay his postmodern professors with a check. 0.00. And then have him go to the bank and cash that and convince the cashier that the zero really means means 6 or 7 or 8. You see? Because the meaning, you see, numbers are also words. Some of you know that. And you know what? I haven't been able to persuade one bursar yet to do this, even if they only have 2 postmodernists on their faculty. But I'm working on that. As well, there is little acceptance of the postmodern approach to knowledge and truth in America's philosophy departments. The postmodern notion that truth is community-oriented likewise appeals to few Christian theologians. While there is no single cohesive postmodern philosophy, rather there are several, a few consistent themes emerge from each mainstream postmodern writer. And I'm only dealing with the classical postmodernist crowd anyway. I'm not dealing with the, B, C, and D. I'm talking about the A team. One of these themes is a denial of universal objective truth. This is clearly declared in Jean Lyotard's famous statement, incredulity towards meta-narrative. A meta-narrative refers to a unifying story that seeks to explain how the world is. In other words, a meta-narrative is a worldview. Now, there might be great discussion on that, and let's leave that for later. But when I look at it, that would be my conclusion. A meta-narrative from a postmodern point of view is a worldview. And they're denying meta-narrative, and they're denying worldview. Lyotard suggests that we should be skeptical of such broad explanations. For example, the statement, God so loved the world, is nonsensical to postmodernists for 2 reasons. 1, they deny the existence of God. 2, statements reflecting the whole world, meta-narratives, are impossible. For postmodernists, since there is no universal truth with a capital T, there are only truths, small t, that are particular to a society or group of people and limited to individual perception. Written or verbal statements can reflect only a particular localized culture or individual point of view. A well-worn catchphrase we hear in this regard is, that may be true for you, but not for me. Yet by making the universal statement, there are no meta-narratives. Postmodernists have put themselves in the position of creating a meta-narrative. Their story that explains the world is that there are no explanations of the world, only local stories told by various cultures. For this reason, we refer to postmodernism as the anti-worldview worldview, or vice versa. Regarding literature, postmodernists are highly concerned with the language of written texts. And this should and we are too. Isn't that interesting? It's not that we're against that. The term defining the major literary methodology of postmodernists is deconstruction, associated with the works of the French philosopher Jacques Derrida. By the way, he just passed away a few months ago. Or was it a year ago? It was just within recent, as I recall. At least I read his obituary. I take it he passed away. Or vice versa. This could be an interesting group here. Reminds me of Isaac Asimov. His brother actually thought he would come back from the grave once he passed off the scene. And his brother is still waiting. He's being decomposed and deconstructed. Yes. Associated with... This is a pretty good group, Tommy. How long do I have to speak to this group? Usually by this time I get the eggs and the tomatoes. I like tomatoes, though, so that always works. I tell them, throw them hard. Associated with the work of the French philosopher Jacques Derrida, deconstruction involves reading a text to ferret out its hidden or multiple meanings. Polysemy. You like that term? Polysemy. Our Supreme Court does, by the way, and that's in law. If you want to see how this translates into law, you go to the section here on law, and they like polysemy. Many meanings to the text, as long as the reader makes the meaning. In this way, a reader's interpretation of the text becomes more important than the text itself. Also significant is the subjectivity of the reader in determining what the author intended. For example, a reader may feel that a particular text really means an author is a racist, even though the text written makes it clear that the author deplores racism. But it doesn't make any difference, okay? As long as the reader says he's a racist, then he's going to find it written in the text someplace, even if it's in a footnote that he has to make up. In 1968, Roland Barthes wrote a short essay entitled "The Death of the Author." By the way, this is a crucial piece of literature. It's not that long either. The Death of the Author. In this essay, he argued that the origin of the text is not the important thing. Rather, it's the destination of the text, the reader. By allowing the reader to invent new meanings, the text is freed from the tyranny of the author's single intended meaning. Wowee, can you imagine? I want to get that check from that bursar. For example, there's no reason to assume that a Shakespearean play means exactly the same thing today as it did when first performed. Okay? To be or not to be? Huh? Where art thou, Juliet? Got a headache. Each author or artist is the product of his or her own cultural setting and uses language to fit his or her condition. Thus, postmodern literary criticism claims that words never describe, get this, the objective world. Words only refer to other words. So it's text all the way from top to bottom. You never break out of the text to see the real world. This is called, in philosophy, anti-realism. It's on your chart under philosophy. Isn't that what it says there? Yes, anti-realism. That's the philosophy of postmodernism. Each author or artist is the product of his or her own cultural setting, uses language to fit his or her condition. Thus, postmodernist literary criticism claims that words never describe the objective world, but only refer to other words. By the way, that's the heart to this whole thing. That's their philosophy. If you want the name of their philosophy, it's anti-realism, it's true, but they're really, it's deconstructionism. It's deconstructionism. Therefore, no matter how a writer constructs a sentence, it can never tell us about the real world, but only about the world as understood by the reader. This concept is summed up in the phrase, "That's just your interpretation." This concept of deconstruction is taken from far beyond the area of literature. Just as you, the reader, are creating the meaning of this text, you also construct the world according to your culture and experiences. In other words, there is no real world. Only there are 6 billion constructions of the world, a belief known as anti-realism. Traditionally, truth with a capital T was understood as the relationship between the real objective world and statements that correspond to the real world. This view is called the correspondence theory of truth. However, postmodernists claim this kind of truth is impossible to achieve. There is no universal truth, only personal, subjective truths that exist only in the particular situation or cultural surrounding. Thus, according to the postmodernist paradigm of anti-realism, there is no real world to which truth can correspond. Rather, our words correspond only to other words and in the end create our understanding of reality. If words signify only other words, then words can never be used in the pursuit of truth. Now, if that's true, then we should close up shop. Yeah, close up shop. Because if words cannot be used in the pursuit of truth, then you have to find out what could be. Maybe pictures. Maybe pictures. Okay. A classic example of the concept that words do not refer to reality is found in Foucault's famous essay entitled, "This is Not a Pipe." Some of you don't believe what I'm talking about here, do you? Yeah. You need to get this. You need to get this article too on reading. This is not a pipe. In this essay, he analyzes a 1966 painting by Margaret that shows a picture of a pipe on a blackboard with a written phrase, "This is not a pipe." Above the blackboard is an abstraction of a pipe hanging in the air. Foucault insists that none of these is a pipe, but merely a text that simulates a pipe. You all with me? Or vice versa. Okay. The primary idea behind this wordplay is the postmodern insistence that all human beings are conditioned by their culture and language, their situation in life, and that no one is able to break through his or her situation to engage a universe with objectively true statements of fact. Now, we know that isn't even true, just from personal experience. I know people that were deep into poverty who are now quite wealthy. Water wets is true for only a small community of individuals locked in their own language and culture. In addition, it's true only as long as the community agrees upon this particular usage. In fact, the community determines what is truth through the words it chooses to use. Richard Rorty has said that truth for him, now this is interesting. Richard Rorty, the smartest guy in the universe, by the way. Richard Rorty, after Hillary. Richard Rorty has said, was that all right, Tommy? I just snuck that in there. This looks like a friendly crowd. Okay. Yeah, that's true. It's next week, I think. Richard Rorty has said that truth for him is whatever his community of scholars allows him to get away with. Wouldn't that be fun? So you drug all your community of scholars, you get away with anything. Yes. Because they're not against drugs. I know some of you don't believe that, but you can read Richard Rorty on that, okay? Richard Rorty, Achieving Our Country, okay? He wants the rock and roll, drugs and sex and rock and roll is all my brain and body needs. Okay, Richard. Richard Rorty has said that truth for him is whatever his community of scholars. Well, what about Joe Sixpack? Right? If everyone can decide what the meaning of the text is, that's 6 billion meanings, correct? 6 billion, or 6.522, whatever the latest UN figure is for the world's population. Well, then why is he talking about, this guy's an elitist then. He only can get away with what a community of scholars says he can get away with. What about Joe Sixpack? You know, he's down at the bar. And he thinks Richard's nuts. If Rorty says the moon is made of green cheese and his community does not disagree with him, then for him the moon is made of green cheese. Wow. And this is heavy. And we have Christians that are going to fall into this nonsense? Not me. Again, reality is not what objectively exists. Reality is produced by our agreement of what it is. We do not discover true facts about the real world. We create these facts. Guess what? We're all little gods. We're all little gods. We create reality. You don't like E equals MC squared? Jump off the Empire State Building and recreate it. And you will discover something rather quickly. You will discover true facts. It's called cement. Unless you hit someone first. French cultural theorist Jean Baudrillard took this concept to its logical conclusion. This is true. I know some of you won't believe this. This is absolutely true. Baudrillard in 1991 claimed that the Gulf War was not real, but merely simulated for CNN television. Yes, this guy right here. The truth that real people were killed did not seem to enter the equation. In actuality, not all postmodernists take the concept of language and reality to Baudrillard's extreme. I don't know why not, by the way. Yet, as Glenn Ward notes, this piece has been used to discredit not only Baudrillard, but postmodernism's abandonment of truth and evaluation. Good war will do that, by the way. You get shot at, you'll discover in a big hurry, you don't create your own reality. Especially if the bullet's going right about there. Rorty also thinks we need to abandon the search for objective truth and instead concentrate on areas where we can all agree. Whoa. By the way, agree with who? Richard Rorty. Yes. He refers to this quest as hermeneutic conversation. By the way, The emergent church loves a hermeneutic, a conversation. Rorty invites his opponents to dialogue with him to see if they can reach agreement, or at least a fruitful disagreement. He says that the hope of agreement is never lost as long as the conversation lasts. But does truth result from such a conversation? Not really. Rorty's insistence on give and take and final agreement only sets the stage for another round of conversations, whether give and take results in further agreement or disagreement. Truth is never the result of continuing conversation because the conversation will never be finished. For Rorty, this use of language and dialogue is edifying philosophy. By the way, he should know better than this, too. He taught philosophy at Princeton for years. A chance to, well, come think about it, maybe. I don't think Singer was there when Richard was there. For Rorty, this use of language and dialogue is edifying philosophy, a chance to create some type of reality with the realization that we can never discover true or objective reality outside the boundaries of language, culture, and locality. Since there is no objective universal truth, Rorty suggests that perhaps we can reach some type of agreeable truth, small t, in order to get along with others. Kevin Van Hooser, research professor of systematics at Trinity, is a shrewd observer of the postmodern scene and a somewhat sympathetic critic. In addition, he understands the important role that Nietzsche played in expressing the foundational ideas for postmodernism. You know what to me is fascinating? They contend that Nietzsche is their godfather. Nietzsche is their godfather. They also contend that he had some mental problems. Some of them finally admit that he died of syphilis, and yet he's their godfather. And their other architect is Foucault, who died of AIDS. What a combination. And Christians would look in this direction for guidance. Someone is not playing with a full deck. Someone's elevator is not proceeding to the top floor. In addition, he understands the important role of Nietzsche that Nietzsche played in expressing the foundational ideas for postmodernism. He writes that Nietzsche, the patron saint of postmodernity, prophesied accurately that if God is dead, then it's interpretation all the way down. That's an interesting statement. If God is dead, then it's interpretation all the way down, because every word that you mention will only refer to another word, and that word will refer to another word, and that word will refer to another word. Now, that only goes so far, however, if you think this thing through. What about the first person who used the word? Okay? The first person. Water. Wet. Or whatever the word. Wasser. Wetter. So the first person used words. Incidentally, from a Christian point of view, this is real simple because we believe language came with the creation. And these guys are atheists, so they have to figure out about language too. And we all know that Adam spoke Swedish. I was just told that the other day, so I know it's true. It was by a Swede. If God is dead, then it's interpretation all the way down. One word only points to another word and never to reality itself. No one interpretation can ever be regarded as final. As in interpretation, so in life, everything becomes undecidable. How'd you like to live that way, by the way? How would you like to live that way? Couldn't even brush your teeth, if you have any. Van Hooser points us to the late C.S. Lewis, who foresaw the shift toward postmodern thinking. Lewis's term for this movement is Bulverism, after its imaginary inventor, Ezekiel Bulver. Van Hooser explains that Lewis imagines the moment that Bulverism was born was when a 5-year-old Ezekiel heard his mother say to his father, "Oh, you say that because you're a man." Whoa. Wow. Bulver intuitively grasped the stunning implication. Arguments need not be refuted, only situated. Isn't it interesting? One rebuts a thought simply by calling attention to the genealogy or location of its thinker. Probably nothing in postmodernism today would surprise Mr. Lewis. Von Heuser offers a concise summary of postmodern philosophy. You know what? We have this in the text, Tommy, and I think I'll just leave this. Okay, there's he 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points summarizes it, and basically I've just read most of them already. So I'll just leave that go. Go down to 2.67. Postmodernists, but this is all in your text anyway, so you'll have all of that material. And I'm going to tell you how other things you're going to have too. Postmodernists have difficulty living with their views of reality. They claim that reality is constructed by language. On one level, we can agree that the statement, "the train is coming," may convey a multitude of interpretations to different people. To some, it may even simulate a train. But we contend that if people fail to get off the tracks, the result of their interpretation could prove fatal. There are indeed objective, nonverbal references to words and texts. I got some good stuff on that, but I'll leave that go. Real life, however, is not open to infinite interpretations. At any particular moment in time, either a train is coming down the track or a train is not coming down the track. This real-world fact is not a matter of our personal interpretation. Regardless of the word games postmodernists play, there is a reality. Postmodernists have a hard time escaping the correspondence theory of truth. Consider also the postmodern phrase, "that's just your interpretation." As D.A. Carson points out, this view is problematic. Carson says he has never met a deconstructionist who would be pleased if a reviewer misinterpreted his work. Now, let me just make a comment on that, free of charge here. When you read Rorty, you never get the impression that he's putting the whole thing up for grabs. You never do that. And Rorty does not deconstruct himself. And when you read, this book is in English, by the way, so you can read it, okay? Now, this book is also in English, but he's a Frenchie, so you won't understand that one. And Derrida, forget it, okay? Let's see, where were we? D.A. Carson says he has never met a deconstructionist that would be pleased if a reviewer misinterpreted his work. He notes in practice, deconstructionists implicitly link their own texts with their own intentions. In other words, deconstructionists believe in authorial intent when they are the authors, but they deny authorial intent when it comes to works by anyone else. Pretty close to the truth? Right on the button. Likewise, we recognize a dilemma with the well-known postmodern slogan, "that may be true for you, but not for me." If the person making that statement means that it applies only to him, then who cares what he says? He's only talking to himself. On the other hand, if the person means to apply this statement also to you, then you can properly respond, "I get the impression that you think I should believe what you just said." If that's the case, why are you trying to impose your concept of what is true on me? Either way, the postmodernist has made a statement he cannot live with himself. It is a position that is self-defeating and ultimately absurd. If you try to apply the postmodernist view of truth in today life, the result is a total breakdown of your ability to communicate. Another serious problem arises from a postmodern philosophy of language. If each community determines what is true enough to use its language, which community gets to decide between rival communities when it comes to conflicting ideas? Take, for example, such disputed ideas as sute, the Hindu practice of burning widows on their deceased husband's pyre, exterminating the Jewish race, or abolishing private ownership of property. Since no community can claim to be right on these other issues, the result is an increased competition for which group will dominate the other. We are witnessing this kind of escalation between warring factions in other areas of society, from the college campus to the political arena to the international scene. And by the way, a footnote free of charge on that. You would think, and then some Christians argue this, they say, well, postmodernism is friendlier to Christianity than secularism or secular humanism. Well, then go to these campuses and see if that's true. Are they allowing Christian... Here we have examples going on right in our very time sequence when Christian groups are being thrown off campus. Well, hey, come on. I thought this was all up for grabs, then we should have as much say as they say. It's not that. It doesn't play that way. It doesn't play that way. Elaborating on this problem is Jürgen Habermas, a German philosopher, speaking from a secular humanist point of view. Ward quotes Habermas as saying that he sees postmodernism's apparent embrace of irrationality as morally bankrupt. By the way, just for your information, some of the greatest arguments against postmodernism are by the secular humanists. I think, and I should be careful on this point, I think more Christians are buying into postmodernism than secular humanists. Shame on us. Shame on us. Habermas sees postmodernism's apparent embrace of irrationality as morally bankrupt and believes, contrary to Lyotard, that some sort of universally agreed upon framework is both possible and necessary in order to ensure that freedom and justice are achieved. How about the Christian universal like, do unto others as you would have others do unto you? How about that one, just to throw it out for a grab, huh? And I'm discovering that the secular humanists are not denying that one right now. Habermas disputes the claims of some postmodern thinkers that human identity is unstable, fragmented, or in process. For him, we are all deep down share eternal human needs and desires. The failure of the postmodernists is that they refuse to propose a route towards the fulfillment of these. Habermas probably has them in his sights as good as any Christian. Paul Kurtz in the Humanist Manifesto, 2000, agrees with Habermas and says that postmodernism, a philosophical literary movement, is nihilistic. By the way, he doesn't say atheistic. I wonder why. Could it be that he himself is an atheist, perhaps? The view that nothing can be known or communicated. In contrast to the idea that objective truth is unknowable, Kurtz declares that science offers reasonably objective standards for judging its truth claims. He's like, water is wet. You want to start that one? That's Kipling, and he wasn't even a scientist. He says science has become a universal language, speaking to all men and women no matter what their cultural backgrounds. Kurtz fails, however, to acknowledge Christianity's role in the foundation and development of modern science. This is a big issue, by the way. We could spend the rest of the day on this one. And I will argue for that point. Also, while Kurtz is correct in his statement that scientific knowledge can lead to truth concerning the physical world, the biblical Christian philosophy of knowledge also emphasizes revealed truth as a means for understanding other truths, including our relationship to God. Yet far more significant than these criticisms is the negative consequences of a postmodern approach to language. For a telling example, look at the results of applying deconstruction to law revealed in the 1973 Roe v. Wade case. In handing down their decision, the majority of the Supreme Court justices chose to look at the Constitution as a living document. By the way, when you hear that term, then you head for the door. Yeah. Scalia says there is no such thing. That is open to many interpretations. There's our little word again, polysemy. As a result, they invented new meanings from the original text, meanings that were not openly stated, and came up with a good novel interpretation regarding a woman's reproductive rights that has apparently gone unnoticed for 200 years. One consequence of that interpretation is that since 1973, over 40 million unborn children have been murdered at the request of their own mothers. Postmodernists are correct about one thing: interpretation is important. Confucius is quoted as saying, when words lose their meaning, people lose their freedom. However, it's worse than that. In reality, when words lose their meaning, people not only lose their freedom, they lose their lives. And 40 million so far, just in that one area. Christian students need to understand that according to the Christian worldview, truth exists. Nearly everything about Christianity is universal in scope and application. God created the whole universe, including men and women. Sin is a universal condition affecting every human being. God loved the whole world, including every human being. Christ died for the sins of the whole world, not just one or two particular communities. I don't know if that's Calvinistic or not, but I contend John Calvin's pointed that out in 1 John 2:2. Christians are to love God with all their heart, mind, and their fellow human beings around the world. Most importantly, God chose to communicate the truth about himself and his world by words contained in the Scriptures and the language of the heavens. Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God as well. God's words do not depend upon a reader's interpretation. Instead, the reader is to interpret the Bible according to God's intention. The Apostle Peter is clear when he writes, "Above all, you must understand that no prophecy of Scripture came about by the prophet's own interpretation." By the way, that's a clear head-on. It's a clear head-on. For prophecy never had its origin in the will of man or the reader. But man spoke from God as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit, 2 Peter 1. To correctly understand the meaning of any text of Scripture, we should heed Paul's advice to Timothy. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a workman who does not need to be ashamed, and who correctly handles the word of truth. 2 Timothy 2. By acknowledging that God has communicated in language truth about the real world, and by diligently studying the Bible, you can know the truth that sets you free. Okay, now, Tommy, we're getting close, aren't we? Yeah.
We'll break it here for questions.
Okay, we'll break it here for questions. Now, here's the deal. If you're a member of this group, I have all of this for you in a book. In other words, all 10 areas. We only covered theology and philosophy. So we're going to give this book to all the members. And you have to be honest with Mr. Stubbs back there. Yes. You tell him, I'm a member, and you get a book free. This contains all 6 worldviews, okay, in 10 categories. Just like this chart is this book. And this book is now being used in hundreds of Christian high schools as a textbook on worldview. So some of you that are involved in Christian education, keep that in mind as well. So that is theirs. Now, if they're not a member and they would still like it, we've got to charge them a little bit, okay, but not a whole lot. Okay. $100.
Or a check with a bunch of zeros on it.
Yes, and we will interpret. You caught that one. He caught that one. That's good. That's good.
Your lecture reminds me of the passage, ever learning but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth, or something like that.
Is that in the Bible?
I think so.
Well, that's situated then.
Okay. Questions?
Tommy, that's your interpretation.
Yeah. Okay.
Because of the uniqueness of Jews in Israel, why would you not include Judaism in your 6 worldviews?
Where is Judaism and Buddhism on this chart? These are the 6 evangelistic worldviews that are vying for converts today. And Judaism is not a major convert worldview. But the truth is, on this chart, you can see I can see Judaism. It's right between Christianity and Islam. And where's Buddhism on this chart, etc.? In other words, this is not a religion chart. This is a worldview chart. So you might have 100 different religions, but it's amazing. When it comes to religion, for example, I say that there are only 3 theologies. Well, you know what? In the history of the world, there have only been 3 theologies. Theism, atheism, and pantheism. Those are the big 3. Everything else is subset. So that's one reason right there. But let's put it this way. If you're interested in this approach, see, I can't even convince Christians that there's a Christian worldview. But if you're interested in this approach and you want to give me 10 sections on Judaism, I'll keep that in mind.
Wouldn't it be the Judeo-Christian worldview?
Of course, of course. And the differences are very close in this whole scheme of things as well.
Not just a worldview, but because of God's view of keeping that a distinct society. That's why I think that.
Okay.
Thank you, David, for a very timely and excellent presentation. Your comment about Christians are embracing postmodernism more than secular humanism. I got to thinking about that statement, and could it be that it's because Christians have a supreme authority for objective truth, whereas the secular humanists do not have anything to really attack?
No. That isn't quite true. Secular humanists have an authority for objective truth and do not deny. Paul Kurtz does not deny objective truth. That's one reason we can have a conversation with Paul Kurtz, and you'd have a very tough time having a conversation with Richard Rorty.
What is their
Science
supreme
and
authority?
reason. Science and reason. And this is why they're in a trouble right now, because Tony Flew, one of their top atheists, has just given up his atheism because of science and reason, and has caused them a big stink.
So the only approach to deal with postmodernism is really to attack postmodernism from a Christian worldview, or to, antithesis rather than synthesis. It seems today people in the church are using it synthetically, right? That's the whole problem. In other words, you have to relate to a postmodern person,
Yeah.
so you have to become postmodern.
No, I think the only reason.
That's what's happening. In
Why
the
don't we?
church a
Why
lot.
don't we approach? I'm thinking. No, just
Yes,
hang on.
okay.
It takes me a while.
Oh,
My little cards don't flip as fast as they used to flip.
okay.
Some of you over 90 know what I'm talking about. I think we can approach them, Tommy, on a couple of their areas if you're interested, but how about story? They don't like propositional truth. Let's give them stories.
Sure, but that's not the heart of their worldview, is it?
It's getting close.
Okay.
Yes, it is getting close.
You mentioned the Christian part of the emergent church, and I'm still just learning about the emergent church. Can you put that in context? In other words, what are the other parts of the emergent church that are
Okay,
Christian?
and that's going to be the lecture by Brother Thomas here. So let him do that. Let him do that.
Thank you, David, for this presentation.
Oh, okay.
This is really hitting home to me because last week my son, who's 15, came home. He's in public school, and up until this time, by the way, we've been very pleased with the education we've received in Keller. It's been largely by Christian teachers. But he came home and brought up something to me that challenged the existence of truth, using that term, and something he had gotten from a teacher in the school that week. So I'm thinking this is really relevant.
Yes, it is.
And I'm also thinking that there are probably a lot of parents that don't have a background in seminary. And is there a book that you could recommend that I could use and that we could disseminate to people that are...
I didn't pay him for this. Right here.
Is this a book that people with just a standard college education could understand?
This is written for seniors in high school. The language was brought down. In fact, what I read today is 12th grade English, okay? Because if I just used quotes from Foucault, you'd all be out of here. Yes, because we had to interpret and bring it down to the 12th grade level. So if anyone can read 12th grade English, they should be able to understand the book.
Well, I certainly appreciate that tremendous presentation. Now I've got a little more practical question. When you're just dialoguing with any of number of people that we deal with on a day-to-day basis who are influenced by postmodernism, and they respond with, well, that's just your interpretation. How do you handle that?
The train is coming. You don't have to be real philosophical in most of this material. Snow is white. Grass is green. These are all, we had all these illustrations in logic class. We never talked about the great philosophical quest of the ages. We talked about the train is coming. What does it mean? What does it mean? And then if you need to, get them over on a track.
Yeah,
That's a practical.
it's my interpretation that the sun is up.
That's true. That's true.
I was just wondering, how does the postmodernism relate to the Gnosticism that was so prevalent coming back in?
Okay, good point. If you know church history, or if you know philosophical history, the pre-Socratics, before Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, you'll find a lot of this material there. A lot of this material. As someone said, I don't know if this is Bible or not, but there is nothing new under the sun. And when it comes to ideas, there are only so many ideas that we can handle. Which is good for us too, by the way, because most of us can't handle more than a basketful. So in this area, historically speaking, you'll find much of this in the Gnostic materials and in the pre-Socratic materials, et cetera, et cetera. And relativism, how long has relativism been around? It's been around
Since
for a
Genesis
long
3.
time. Yeah, it's been around.
Or maybe Isaiah 14.
Really? You like Isaiah 14 better?
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Am I done?
Yes. Thank you, David. Now, the whole point for giving this lecture is to show you the murky environment, philosophically and intellectually, that we are in and moving more toward. And you can understand why people who think like this or have been affected, because obviously most people on the street don't think as deeply, and as consistently on this, but they're being impacted by this kind of thought, why they don't like dispensational charge. You see? It don't fit in other words, because that's too clear, too certain, too precise, and all that kind of stuff. And so that, this is one of the reasons why prophecy, especially in the academic level, I think is in decline. Now, I've sent my sons to David Noebel's Summit Ministry in the summer, where they learn, it's 2 weeks, isn't it, David? And you learn worldview in these 8 major areas. And I just recommend, anybody you're interested, a young person, especially before they go to college or something like that, might want to consider going to this for a couple of weeks so that they won't be assaulted, when they hit even the Christian universities. Christian universities are worse than secular universities because they don't have their guard up at the Christian universities, and most Christian universities, is warmed over humanism or paganism or postmodernism or whatever and all that kind of stuff. So they need to know this stuff to be able to interact. And so we appreciate David coming and presenting this today.